Welcome to Issues and Answers with your host, Dianne K. Issues and Answers is presented as a public service to inform, educate, and better the lives of New Mexicans. And now, Issues and Answers with your host, Dianne K.
Welcome to the program. I'm Dianne K. Yes, this is a stressful time of the year. Of course, the holiday seasons are supposed to be the most wonderful time of the year, but let's be realistic. It's full of stress. And what do you do when you're stressed? Not just around the holidays, but with paperwork that you need to do, paying your taxes, talking to customer service representatives in India who you might not understand, and you're dealing with problems with your credit card. That on top of having to try to understand what they're saying. All of these are stressors. I know when I'm stressed, when I face that paperwork I need to do, what do? Immediately I go to the refrigerator and grab a diet soda. That puts me at ease. And I call it a chaser. I get a little piece of chocolate too. Until I did this program, because we're going to talk about stress and the triggers, I didn't really realize, like clockwork, I really did that until I started thinking, what do I do to react to stress? Well, I grab that diet soda. I open the refrigerator or eat that chocolate. That just kind of calms me to get me ready to deal with the stress. Think about, what do you do? Do you actually realize what you do to react to stress? Do you know what your triggers are? Well, on the show, if you don't know what they are, you're going to be thinking about them. And today we're going to give you some tips, not just for the holidays, but throughout the whole year, the new year, and throughout your life. How do we react to triggers of stress and what we can do about them? Hopefully things that will save our lives, because dealing with stress, in addition to what we eat and if we get exercise or not, are all components that really affect our life and our lifestyle. So during this holiday season, sit back and enjoy the show and learn how to deal better with stress before it kills us. We'll be back right after this. Yes, around the holidays and into the New Year's, as we set our New Year goals, there's additional stress put on us. Well, my guest today has taught a course through the Bernalillo County Extension Program, through New Mexico State University, on how to deal with stress. But she's going to give us tips today that we can use starting immediately. And she's going to try to change my stress triggers and what I do. Dianne Christensen, thank you so much for serving our state, our community, and for being on Issues and Answers. You are Bernalillo County Cooperative Extension Service, and you are a coach for all of us. So thank you so much. And you're laughing. I love your laugh. And you're laughing at me, and you're laughing at our viewers. Stress. Okay, seriously, stress kills.
Yes, it does. It absolutely kills. We're going to talk a little bit about that today, but I know in my own life I was working on exercising and eating right, but I came to the realization that unless I manage my stress, a lot of it's managing your stress and your mindset is so important for your overall health. So
but
it's
we
very
don't
important.
really hear that, Dianne Christensen. We just hear what you eat and exercise.
Right, but not managing your stress can really lead to a lot of really damaging disease. And it's hidden, because you and I could be stressed, but we don't look stressed. It's something
I
can
look
hide.
Stressed. People are I look stressed.
But if we eat too much, we gain weight. If we don't exercise, we become weak. But stress is something that we can hide, but we absolutely need to learn to deal with that to be healthy.
So you've taught through Bernalillo County Extension, New Mexico State University, a course. You may or may not be offering it in 2023 or 2024, but we're so grateful that you're here on the show today to give us some tips about stress. So let's start with what you want to start with, because you've taught it, and I'm thinking maybe, what is stress?
Yeah, this is such an important tool that I really wanted to share with viewers, because it's really life-changing if you can do it, and it's easy. It's an easier one to remember. I think a lot of us think, I've got to get rid of the stress in my life. I have too much stress in my life. I need to get rid of it. In our day and age, that simply is not possible. And so this tool teaches you how to...
What's the tool?
We're going to talk about that, just how leveraging your stress for positive life change. And
leveraging your stress
for positive life change.
And what do you mean by leveraging? When I researched a little about this, I thought, what does she mean by leveraging? I know sometimes we leverage money and we leverage things.
Yeah, it's using the stress that we have in our lives to bring about positive life change. Instead of trying to change our whole lifestyle, which is completely unrealistic, it's understanding ourselves, and instead of reacting in our traditional negative ways, finding new positive ways to build quality strengths that we want to integrate into our lives using our stress.
Because we're going to have stress.
Right.
Well, sad to say, our community gives us stress. I just heard recently, I was mailing some things, some checks to people, they never received it, and I just heard that, these mail carriers in Albuquerque were robbed.
Yeah.
I mean, I was stressed when the checks did not arrive. Now I'm thinking, so I don't have control of that. I'm very upset. Mail carriers were robbed.
Yes. Yeah.
So, something I can't control, but it sure stressed me out when this person said, I didn't receive the check. Did you send it to the right address? Are you sure you did this? So,
yeah.
Okay, that aside,
yes.
I try not to stress, but our community, our world gives us stress.
Right, and that's a perfect example, I think. So let's think about our stress response. A lot of people have heard about this. It's the FFF response, the fight, or freeze response. So, have you been in a car accident, for example? When you just had this huge emotional response because you just had this very traumatic thing happen to you. And so we have the FFF response for a lot of reasons. It's survival. So your blood pressure goes up, your heart rate goes up, glucose is dumped into your system, all these harmful neurotransmitters are dumped into your system because you have this big response for life-saving, a big stress response.
And you have no control of that. It happens.
Right.
It just
and what happens in our brain is our emotive part of our brain takes over, right? If you've just been hit by a car, another car, you're like having this big emotional, your mind, the rational part of your brain is not operating at full capacity. I mean, it's down there because you're having this big response. So what happens in our day-to-day life is we have pseudo-stress survival. So everything that comes along in our lives, or many things, like the checks in the mail, create this really big response, just like that type of FFF response. But what happens over time when you constantly have the blood pressure going up, the glucose being dumped in, harmful transmitters, blood pressure, all of those things, it creates chronic cell inflammation. And so your cells become inflamed over the course of time, and that leads to certain types of cancers, Alzheimer's, diabetes, metabolic syndrome. There are so many chronic diseases that come about as a result of our inability to manage our stress in healthy ways.
And again, that's a physical reaction your body is having. And you call it what, cell?
It's chronic cell inflammation.
Chronic cell inflammation is caused by us not knowing really how to deal with the stress. But with the acute stress, the car accident or the divorce or something happens to your child, that happens just automatically, and there's nothing we can do. But you're saying when we have the pseudo-stress, we could manage that. Otherwise, we'll have that cell
inflammation. And that's what I began to realize is that I was having this FFF response over, oh my gosh, I forgot to mail the bill. Oh my gosh, I was having this big reaction, and that was so damaging for my body.
Diane, I never knew why stress. I hear stress kills. I always thought it had to do with the heart, but it has to do with those cells.
Well, it also leads to heart disease.
But you call the cell inflammation is an automatic trigger, and cell inflammation then causes all these other diseases?
All these other diseases. That is why it's so important to manage your stress. It also leads to obesity. So there's so many negative outcomes from it, and that's why we need to learn to leverage it and manage it in a different way. It's entirely possible.
So the pseudo-survival stress is your body is just reacting to things of everyday stress that we're going to have every day. I mean,
I don't even want to discuss
what happens in our lives here in New Mexico and Albuquerque that
Right.
puts stress on us.
Yeah.
The crime, the homelessness,
Right.
the mail being stolen,
Right. Yeah. And
not
so
being able to go to the grocery store because you're afraid to go out at night. I mean, all these, I mean, could go on, and all these things that stress me.
Right. Yeah.
But they don't have to, I don't have to have that reaction.
They don't need to. So it's important to understand you can either choose to respond to your stress in a positive way and build positive character qualities that you would like in your life, or you can respond negatively or maladaptively and reinforce negative qualities. You can keep
Well, that's what people
reinforcing
probably
those.
do if they don't know how to learn, if they haven't learned to do it the positive. So what are the what did you call it,
It's adaptive and maladaptive
maladaptive.
responses.
Well, let's talk about the maladaptive. I'm sure that's
So
what I do.
maladaptive is, I think we have a slide that shows a couple fighting. And, you know, every time they discuss a certain topic, they get into a big fight. And it just, so what they're building into their lives from this negative response is intolerance, unforgiveness, impatience, damaging their relationship. Those are the things that by responding in that same pattern, they're building into their lives. Another trigger that people typically have.
Let's stay with that one, because that sounds really familiar.
Yeah,
That
or traffic, getting caught in traffic. That's another very common one. People get so upset in traffic. And so what are they building into their lives when they're yelling and screaming at that other person? Does that other person know? No. They're building impatience, frustration, anger, resentment, bitterness. Multiple times a day, you're reinforcing those things,
Reinforcing that in the car. Yes.
Yeah, and you're damaging your body because you're getting mad. All of those things are
You're
happening.
triggering the cells.
Yeah, chronic. You're just contributing to your chronic cell inflammation.
So people do that. At least people I know.
Oh, yeah.
React this way.
This is why it's really important to understand what your triggers are. Let me give you an example of one of mine. You alluded to it. Poor customer service is definitely one of mine. I call it, you know how you go to the grocery store and you pick the very longest line where someone is, writing a check and they have 20,000 coupons and, one of my problems is that I'm not very good about allowing enough time. So I zoom into the store. I think I'm just going to grab that thing. I get in this too long of line. So I'm getting impatient, frustrated, angry, mad. By the time
And it's just hurting yourself.
Right. And by the time I get to the checker, the best case scenario is if I could just keep my mouth shut, and I leave the store more stressed than when I got there. So I began to realize this was one of my triggers, and I could feel it rising, on the phone, whatever it is. So what I began to do when I'm in that long line, I thought instead of responding with anger, frustrations, impatience, I'm going to do a gratitude list. I'm going to stop and think about gratitude. And not just for my house and my dog and my family, those big things, but, I'm really grateful. It was a beautiful day today. I'm so thankful. It was such a pretty day. I'm really thankful I have a job so that I can shop. I have money to buy these things. I'm grateful for the variety that we have. So by the time I get to the checker, I've worked retail. It's not an easy job. I'm kind. How are you? Because I'm grateful. And I have an interaction with the checker. I bless them. And I leave the store grateful and appreciative and less stressed. Just by changing that one way, and I'm building into my life, I'm exercising gratitude, I'm building in patience, I'm building in kindness, and those things are things I want in my life. I want to reinforce those kinds of things in my life. That's important to me. And so it's really important for people to understand what their triggers are.
Let's go into some more triggers.
Okay, yeah. So when you're thinking about your triggers, some of them are obvious. Like the driving in the car, for example, that's one of my husband's. So, that some of them are readily apparent to us. People might
dealing
know.
with people's ineptness.
Yes, yeah.
That's in this society.
Right. Mm-hmm.
More so than ever, we know people aren't going back to work. They're not working. You go into a store, they don't have the help. You go to the checker who doesn't know how to add.
Right.
You get mad at the school system because they haven't learned how to do simple math.
Yeah.
So, but in ineptness, people are just not carrying the load or haven't been taught to do things correctly.
Right. So those can
So
be.
that's a big trigger.
Yeah,
So
that can be a personal trigger. Other triggers, there's a couple other places you can look for triggers. For example, in my own life, a few years ago, I went through a very traumatic experience. And so I lived through that experience, but every time I recalled it, every time I told someone about it, my body had all of that emotional, the same emotional reaction as if it was happening again. And so it's really important if you have a traumatic experience, like you mentioned, a divorce, or, you know, all these things come into our lives, but to really do the work around it. And often it's forgiveness, you know, really moving through that so it no longer affects you in those emotional ways.
But I'd say don't think about it anymore, because it's just you relive it each time. You said.
Well, yes, but if you stuff it, you haven't really dealt with it. So now I look back to that very traumatic experience, and I don't have any emotional response anymore because I've forgiven that. So
forgiveness is one way to react to it.
It's a key way. There are many ways, but it's important just to acknowledge this was really hard, but I'm going to do the work around it so I don't have this big emotional response every time I recall it. Another thing that you can think about is your family of origin. I grew up in a wonderful family, but fear was kind of the underlying emotion, or in some people it could be anger or guilt. So some of those triggers that we have are learned from our family of origin. Another one you alluded to earlier as well is those emotional things. Like for me, it was emotional eating. So when I began to see that one of my biggest responses to stress was eating, I realized stress is the trigger, eating was my response, but in between there was a space where I could introduce more rational thought. So I began to introduce more rational thought into that and finding other ways to deal with that stress rather than eating. And, you know, other forms of self-nurture that addressed my need, my emotional need in that moment, besides food. And that was a game changer for me.
Give us some more practical things. Practical, real-life examples. I don't want to bring up mine anymore because it's stressing me out. No, truly. And I feel that I've kind of given up on things because I used to have such a reaction, not a reaction, but just a feeling deep down that it's hopeless because I see the degradation of many things.
Yeah.
So I don't react as much because I've given up.
Well,
you try to change things,
yes,
and it doesn't work, then I've given up.
So I think a really helpful, another little tool that I teach in my stress management is called the circle of trust and the circle of responsibility. And so sometimes there are situations in our lives that are out of our control. And, you know, I think one in my life now, I have adult children. And so sometimes I stress, I worry about them. And I have to stop and ask myself, okay, what is in your circle of responsibility to them? What are you responsible to them? And what is in your circle of trust? Because quite frankly, there is very little that I can do. They're grown adults now, you know? And so I feel like I'm called to love them and to serve them and to bless them with my words. Those are the things I can do for my adult children. But can I change the decisions they're making in their lives, or, you know, all those things? No, I can't. That's out of my circle of responsibility, and it has to go in the circle of trust. And another thing to think about is people, this was especially apparent through the pandemic. People got so wrapped up in, you know, whether there was toilet paper in the stores or what the government was doing, and they just feel really helpless. It's really important to focus every day on what you can control rather than what you can't control. Because we can't control the toilet paper supply, we cannot control the government, there's so many things that we can't control. And so if we focus more on what we can control, it's very powerful. So one of the things I ask myself most mornings is, what can you control today? I can control what I eat. I have that choice of what I'm going to choose to eat. Is it healthy or unhealthy? I can choose to be active. Am I going to take a walk or am I not? And what am I going to think about? Am I going to allow myself to be like taken over with fear and worry and build those qualities, that fear and that anger and that frustration and bitterness? Am I going to build that into my life? Or am I going to choose to focus on gratitude? Am I going to choose to focus to bless somebody that's in my life that I might see that day? Am I going to choose those things and build those qualities into my life? Because that's all we have is today.
It's the choice. We have the choice, though. And how that affects us is how we react to something negative. We have the choice to do that.
It's not what happens to us, it's how we choose to respond to it.
What's adaptive stress? Acute plus repetitive.
So adaptive stress is when you see your trigger. So once you've identified your trigger, and again, this is not a big introspection kind of thing. It's just noticing it. Like, oh, I get really hacked off every time I'm in the car. What am I going to do about that? So adaptive stress is just like lifting weights. You introduce you stress to your muscles and you get stronger. And so that's positive. Like when you go to do strength training, you're introducing stress to your muscles to build strength. And this is the same kind of thing. We're building in, we're introducing things that are going to help us build positive
and
characters.
What are those things?
Well, for example, understanding, like in traffic, what are you going to choose to build? So what I did, I found that I would get really stressed in traffic. It seemed like invariably when I was teaching, I would get caught in a traffic jam, and I would get so stressed out because I was going to be late for my class. Finally, I realized the people will understand, and now I think, oh, this is some me time that I wasn't expecting. So I make sure that I turn on beautiful music in the car, and I just focus on this is me time. I think about things that I'm grateful for while I'm sitting in traffic. And by the time I get to my class, even if I'm late, I'm calmer, I'm more peaceful, because I haven't worked myself up into a frenzy of being late.
Okay. Triggers can result in positive adaptations.
Yes, but you need to pick something that's challenging. If it doesn't challenge you, it doesn't change you. And so, for example, if I was thinking, I'm going to choose to be kind to my friend when I have lunch, that's not very, that's like lifting a 3-pound weight.
How about the handyman who says they'll come and they don't come, and
right.
the repair person or the internet service provider doesn't come between 10 and 6?
Yes.
And you've been at home waiting all day.
Yes,
okay.
Yes. So that's a good one. And Brene Brown, she has a term that she uses that I like, and is learning to be a wholehearted person. And living wholeheartedly fundamentally believes that we are all doing the best we can given what we've, with the skills we've been given. So it changes with people. But in that situation, I think to myself, yes, I'm moving down, frustrating, impatience. But I think fundamentally, is that repairman, repairwoman, are they doing the best that they can with the skills they've been given? Probably they had a really long repair that took way longer than they thought. I think I'm going to choose to believe they're doing the best they can. Even though it's not serving me right now, I'm going to choose to believe that they're doing the best they can.
Triggers can result in positive adaptations. Open-mindedness, confidence, self-control, creativity, positive attitude, passionate, risk-taker, loving, resilient, problem-solver, optimistic. What does this mean? Triggers can result in positive adaptation.
Well, it's just like, and I'm not kidding, when I talked about standing the customer service thing, as I started to work on that, I really, as I exercised, as I made that choice, instead of being angry and frustrated, as I really made that decision that I am going to go through my gratitude list, I am such a much more grateful person now. And I'm a more patient person and overall kinder because you're changing the way your neural pathways in your brain. This is called neuroplasticity. And so instead of choosing, like let's use the traffic example. Every time you get in the car, you get hacked off, you're yelling, screaming, getting so upset over the other drivers. You have an 8-lane highway. You've been doing that for so many years. That's what your brain just goes to that. But if you make a choice, you make a choice point, I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm going to do, when I'm in the car and I'm in a traffic jam, I am going to see it as I'm going to review my things I'm grateful for instead of getting mad. I am going to listen to music I enjoy. I'm going to create this time for myself. That is building in patience. It's building in kindness, those kinds of things. And eventually your brain, as you begin to go down those new neural pathways, your brain begins to grow those neural pathways. Your brain is plastic, really. It's able to change. And so what I've seen with poor customer service, for example, I don't go down those other thought patterns nearly as much as I used to. Now I really do choose gratitude much more often. And that builds in those character qualities that we're looking for.
And I think your body and soul and mind then feels, I'd rather be appreciative than being rigid, intolerant. I mean, they're nicer feelings, I imagine, as well.
They are, and it's important. I mean, this sounds kind of high level, but what is your vision, mission, and purpose for your life? I mean, we make those choice points every single day. Do I want to be an angry person? Do I want to be impatient? Do I want to be unforgiving? No. Those are not things that I value, and they're not qualities I want to build into my life. I want to be known as a people lover. I want to be known as a patient person. I want to be known as kind. I want to be known for being grateful. I want to be known for choosing trust instead of fear.
Even everything that life throws at you.
Yes,
right?
yes.
Okay, even though we have the choice. Yes, she's smiling.
We have that choice point every day.
That's the challenge.
Yeah, and I think if we look at what are our vision, mission, and purpose in life, I mean, we don't think about that very often, right? But I know the call on my life is to serve people.
And you have, and we appreciate it.
So
all the tips you have during this very stressful but wonderful, grateful holiday season. Dianne Christensen with New Mexico State University and the Bernalillo County Extension Program. Thank you.
Thank you.
We are grateful to you.
Thank you.
And to KCHF TV for bringing you this program. Happy holidays. Make it a great one with your family. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Issues and Answers with your host Dianne Kinnewater is presented as a public service to inform, educate, and better the lives of New Mexicans. To comment on today's program or to purchase a copy of any Issues and Answers program, visit sunbroadcasting.org or call us at 505-345-1991.